Hey friends, and welcome back to my channel. If you haven't already, please make sure you click like and subscribe to my channel. It will really help my channel to grow and it's super appreciated. So in this week's video, we're going to be talking about the tragic murder and disappearance of Lisa Gaudenzi. Lisa was an incredibly driven individual and she was also a really devoted mother. From her first marriage, Lisa did have a young daughter who had cystic fibrosis, and she had custody of this daughter and was the primary caretaker. Because Lisa was essentially a single mother by the time that marriage ended, she knew that she had a lot of pressure to take care of her daughter and to provide as good of a life as she can for her young daughter. So after Lisa's first marriage came to an end, she decided that she would be leaving New Jersey, where she was born and raised, and she would be moving over to Richmond, Virginia to pursue a degree in law. And it was in Virginia that Lisa would attend Virginia Commonwealth University, and she would enroll herself into pre-law studies. Alongside her duties of being a mother and a student, Lisa also took up a job in an automobile shop. And this is when Lisa would meet a man by the name of Lawrence Gaudenzi, and Lawrence was a tow truck driver who was also a customer of the automobile shop that Lisa was working at that time. I'm not 100% certain about the exact year that they met because I had a hard time finding this information online, but I believe that it was probably in the early 1990s. However, if anyone has this information, please do let me know in the comments. So according to Lisa's friend, Rachel Fitzpatrick, Lisa was really charmed by Lawrence. He had a bit of those bad boy vibes, and he always managed to say the right things to Lisa when it came to family values, raising children, and even in his faith in the church. By 1992, the couple seemed to be getting on pretty well and were actually really serious, and their friends and family really thought that both Lawrence and Lisa were perfect together. Lawrence even stepped up and offered to help Lisa raise her medically compromised daughter, Leah. And in 1993, Lisa and Lawrence would take their relationship to the next level, and the two would have their first biological daughter together. About 6 months after having their first daughter together, Shelby, the couple would marry, and then they would move their family outside of the city and out into a much quieter, more remote area in Virginia. However, this is when things start to get a little tense between the two. Lawrence apparently had difficulty finding work in the new town that they were living in, and according to Lisa's friend Rachel, it seemed that Lawrence had difficulties in maintaining a full-time job, and it became a question as to whether or not Lawrence was capable or had the ability to financially provide for his family. Soon enough, money seemed to be at the center of all of their arguments, and eventually some of these arguments would become physical. So it seemed like their marriage wasn't doing so well, and Lisa, at this point, as a last-ditch effort to save both her marriage and to support her family, she decided that she would enlist herself into the US Army. And in doing so, the military would pay for her schooling, which would directly support her new goal of becoming a military judge one day. But instead of being happy for Lisa's sacrifice for her family and for her marriage, Lawrence grew to become really resentful. Lawrence was now a stay-at-home dad, and he didn't like the fact that Lisa wasn't accessible to him at all times. It's really crazy because supposedly Lawrence would try to call Lisa while she was away at training, and of course, because she's training, he wouldn't be able to get a hold of her, and then he would get angry. Some of Lisa's friends have even reported that Lawrence would sometimes show up at the training base to try to derail Lisa's training. Yeah, it just seemed like he didn't want her to really succeed through her basic training and just wanted her to fail. It kind of just seemed like he was really starting to lose his mind, and this was causing even more strain on their marriage. However, luckily, despite his best efforts, Lisa did manage to graduate in 1995. And about 1 week after her graduation, Lisa was supposed to show up for her officer training, but she never arrived, which did raise some eyebrows from her management. And this did lead the military police to call up Lawrence and to just let him know that Lisa never showed up for her officer training. And in January 1995, Lawrence would go into the Caroline County Sheriff's Office to file a missing persons report for his missing wife. Lawrence told the sheriff that the last time he saw Lisa was on the 26th of January in 1995, and he had driven her over to a bus station in Richmond so that she could get on a bus to go to Petersburg. Harrisburg for her officer training. He said that Lisa, because she was on active duty with the US Army, she was meant to take a bus to Fort Lee so that she could begin her officer's training. But investigators would look into this and come to the realization that there was no bus with that schedule for that day. In the report, Lawrence also said that Lisa was having an affair with someone, or with a guy that she had met at the boot camp, and that she had likely run away with him. And when Lisa's family heard about this, they were really pissed. They knew that Lisa and the whole idea of her running off with some guy and cheating on her husband just was not something that she would ever do. She would never leave behind her children either. So her family didn't believe this at all. Lawrence even tried to claim that this wasn't Lisa's first time running away from a husband. He told officers that she had done the same thing to her first husband, Jim Burdett. But unfortunately, when authorities tried to contact Jim to confirm whether or not the story was true, they weren't able to contact him or to locate him. So at this point, months have gone by and there were still no answers about where Lisa went or what happened to her. Authorities would at some point call Lawrence in to take a polygraph test. This was something that Lisa's family demanded because they just knew that there was something off about Lawrence's behavior and his story. And as soon as Lawrence was called in to take a polygraph test, he took 3-year-old Shelby and they disappeared. Leah, who was Lisa's daughter from her first marriage, was already at this point living with other relatives, so she wasn't taken with Shelby when Lawrence and Shelby disappeared. And as soon as Lawrence disappeared, the case was quickly turned over to the state police and was being investigated as a homicide. According to a friend of Lisa's, who was interviewed at the time, Lisa had told the friend that she was planning to divorce Lawrence. So apparently Lisa and this friend of hers were having this conversation at Lisa and Lawrence's house. Lisa wasn't aware that Lawrence was around the house at the time the conversation was happening, so she was just openly discussing this with her friend. And then all of a sudden, Lawrence shows up and he's standing at the door and he's overheard everything. He obviously didn't look too happy, didn't say anything, and then just walked away. And apparently that was the last time that Lisa's friend, or anyone else for that matter, had seen her. For about 5 years after Lawrence's disappearance, his whereabouts remained unknown, but Lisa's family were determined to find answers about what happened to Lisa and to find both Lisa's body and to find their granddaughter. And in 2002, the family would approach a news media station for help. The news outlet ended up displaying Lawrence's photo all over the news, and this would lead a tipster to call in with some information, claiming that they had seen Lawrence near Harrisonburg, Virginia. And this piece of information would end up leading the state police to Lawrence and Shelby. When the state police did find Lawrence and Shelby, they weren't going by their real names. They were going by the name of Randy and Logan. Luckily, Lawrence did have a pretty unique tattoo on his chest, so the police were able to identify him as Lawrence, and they did end up bringing Lawrence in. Apparently, Lawrence, who at this time was going by the name of Randy, had taken the identity of a missing homeless man. And while there wasn't enough evidence for the police to arrest Lawrence on Lisa's disappearance, they did arrest him on fraud charges. Police also learned that while living his new life, Lawrence had actually remarried a woman, and he and that woman were raising Shelby together. And this is actually really sad because in an interview that Shelby did when she was older, she seemed pretty devastated to find out that her dad wasn't who he said she was and that she wasn't who she thought she was. It was pretty devastating to her to find out that her life was a complete lie. Now, while Lawrence was serving time for fraud, the investigators did make a shocking discovery. Lawrence had actually met up with Jim Burdett, Lisa's ex-husband from her first marriage, just days after Lisa's disappearance. So when they found out this information, investigators knew that they had to find Jim because he definitely had some important information that could help this case. And somehow investigators did manage to track him down to the state of Florida, and they headed over there to try to find him. And by some miracle, they actually did find Jim. And when they did find him, he was just walking alone on the road. He was blind and homeless. Jim had nothing but a suitcase with him, which he had apparently been carrying with him for years. And when investigators opened up the suitcase, what they found in there was a corsage from Jim and Lisa's wedding. He had kept it for all these years as a way to remember her by. And alongside that corsage, he also kept a few tape recordings, which we will go into very shortly. So when the investigators found Jim told the investigators that Lawrence had asked Jim to visit him in Virginia because he had something he needed Jim's help with. Jim, who's blind, did say that he relies heavily on tape recorders to help with his memory. So in 1995, when Jim went to visit Lawrence in Virginia, he did decide to secretly record a lot of their conversations because Jim was very suspicious of Lawrence's behavior. According to Jim, Lawrence wasn't acting like he had just lost his wife. So back to the tape recordings that the investigators found in Jim's suitcase. Jim would end up handing these over to the police or to the investigators, and on one of those recordings, investigators would hear Lawrence asking Jim to help him bury a dog. Jim would end up accompanying Lawrence to some location, like on a drive to some location that Jim couldn't really pinpoint because he was blind, or he is blind, and he couldn't see where they were going. He helped Lawrence bury or move whatever was in the duffel bag that Lawrence had asked Jim to help him move. I mean, I think now we kind of have an idea of what was in the duffel bag, but back then I don't know what Jim was thinking. I don't know if he suspected that it was Lisa or if he actually believed it was a dog. That is all really confusing to me as well. Like, why did he not speak up sooner, and what was going through his head? I have no idea. But anyways, remember at this point, Lawrence was still serving jail time for fraud. He wasn't convicted or anything like that for anything relating to Lisa. And it seemed like at that point he had served his time for that and he was now being released from jail. But luckily, investigators didn't give up on this case and they were still trying to find answers for Lisa's family. Because of this, they decided to turn their focus on past witnesses to see if they could try to rejog anybody's memories or find new witnesses, evidence, anything that could help with Lisa's disappearance. This time, they decided that they would revisit a former babysitter who was a teenager at the time of Lisa's disappearance. Apparently, this witness was incredibly terrified of Lawrence and was really concerned that Lawrence would come after her if she had said anything about what she had seen during that time or what she thought about Lawrence. So back in 1995, this babysitter was actually living in Lawrence and Lisa's basement apartment. And so back in January 1995, she recalls Lawrence and Lisa having this massive domestic argument, and right after, she just sees Lawrence storming out of the house. He would return about 20 minutes later to tell the babysitter she needs to clean the house, but she needs to stay away from the bathroom. And so the babysitter, who's about 14 or 15 years old at this time, she was curious. She's like, why is he telling me not to go into the bathroom? So what does she do? She tries to go and open the door of the bathroom, but the bathroom is locked. So she decides that she's gonna pick the lock, and she manages to pick the lock, and when she opens the door, she's horrified to find the floor covered in blood. And this was super scary to the poor girl. She has just witnessed this massive fight, and then she sees blood covering the floor. So she was really terrified, and she would end up keeping this a secret for more than a decade because she was so scared of Lawrence and what he would do to her if she ever spoke up. But luckily, by the time that the investigators had revisited her as a witness, she was no longer a young teen. She was a grown adult and she was no longer terrified of Lawrence. So she decided to give this statement to the investigators and was able to provide some closure to Lisa's family. In 2008, more than 13 years after Lisa's disappearance, Lawrence was finally charged for her murder. He would accept a plea in exchange for information about Lisa's death. Lawrence admitted to wrapping Lisa's body in a sleeping bag and then putting her and the bag in a metal drum and then covering her body with muriatic acid, which would help to essentially dissolve her body. However, he did refuse to tell the investigators the motives or her cause of death. On top of that, he also refused to tell investigators or the judge where he had put her body, and when the judge asked about it, he just said he couldn't remember where he had put her body. Lawrence was then sentenced to 25 years behind bars. It's astounding to me that you can take somebody's life and only get 25 years behind bars. This was shocking to Lisa's friends and family, and very understandably so. Like, how is this guy only getting 25 years? It's insane. It doesn't make sense. What's even more infuriating is that about 1 year into Lawrence's sentence, he reaches out to his agents and he asks if he can get his sentence reduced, if he can tell them where Lisa's body is buried. The investigators did take him up on this, and they met with him the very next day, and Lawrence would lead them to the middle of nowhere where they would find 3 buried drums filled with muriatic acid placed near a tree. And this led to a massive search of the surrounding area, and the investigators during this search would find a long red thread. And this long red thread actually belonged to the sleeping bag, which would contain Lisa's remains. Lisa was given a military funeral on the east coast of Florida, and currently Lawrence is expected to be released from jail in 2030. Which is not too long from now, which is crazy to think about. However, Lawrence is a prime suspect in the disappearance of Randy Evans, who is the homeless man whose identity he had stolen. So if anything comes out of that investigation, then Lawrence could very well end up with more jail time. I will be sure to keep you guys updated if there is any new information on that, because I really am curious to know what happened to Randy Evans and how did Lawrence end up with his identity. That does bring the case to a close. What happened to Lisa was horrible, and I'm really shocked that Lawrence only managed to get 20 something years of prison time. How is that possible? He murdered his wife. He took a mother away from her children. It's crazy that you can get so little time for doing something like that. But then again, I guess this really does show that our justice system is not the best. But yeah, well, thank you so much guys for tuning in to this video. I really appreciate it. If you liked this content, please don't forget to click like and subscribe. It really does help my channel and it's super appreciated, so please don't forget to do it. And I hope to see you guys tuning in for my next video. Bye guys!